cheating.
Nope, circle right forward.
So you get one. You don't have a zero, so that's too hard. Well, we're missing a couple of our members who we thought were going to show up, and somebody said that there was a rainstorm that ran through, which is causing some delays. But I think since we were already 6 minutes into our meeting, according to the official timer here, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Richard Smalling. I'm a cardiologist in Houston and chair. Why don't we go around and everybody remind our attendees who you are and your role.
I'm Karen Pickard. I'm from the GTAC Advisory Council, and I was appointed to be ex officio member of this committee.
Now, Karen, for your information, used to be a member of this committee, served 8 years or some period of time. So then she graduated and now is at the big table. Okay.
I'm Jeffrey Mincy. I'm the EMS chief for Coryell Memorial Healthcare System.
I'm Catherine Bissell. I'm the clinical manager for stroke and cardiac for CETRAC.
I'm David Walter. I'm an assistant professor at UT Health Science Center, and I'm a paramedic with the Austin Medical Director for San Diego Fire Department.
Todd Haugen. I'm a paramedic in El Paso. I work for Las Palmas del Sol Healthcare.
So I'm told that Lisa Rivedo had a serious injury to her neck and had to have surgery day before yesterday, I guess, and is doing well, but nonetheless incapacitated. And Dr. McCarthy is attending another meeting for emergency medicine directors, and Christine's father's ill and she's having to attend to him, so hopefully our comrades will get better and be able to attend next time. So we have our agenda. Really looks like Catherine Bissell is going to be talking for the next hour and a half, and perhaps Catherine, you could start off by talking about our pre-hospital data collection effort.
Okay, pre-hospital data collection effort. We do have some pockets in some areas around the state where we're looking at building a registry that we can begin to collect the NEMSIS data points. It's all in production right now. Nothing has been finalized, but we do know that our efforts are going to be related to getting the NEMSIS data that's already going to be collected by EMS. So we don't want to increase the reporting burden on any of the EMS agencies. And at some point, our goal is to also have some cardiac and stroke data that marries up with the EMS data, so we can finally begin to put together a full patient record for these patients. So again, it's in production. We've got a lot more that's coming out about it, so stay tuned.
So, well, that's pretty brief.
That's where we're at right now.
Okay. David, do you have some more insight into this?
So, a little bit. Right now, as far as the RAC Data Collaborative, they have done quite a bit of work. They have two separate yet similar mechanisms, one for STEMI and one for stroke. And it is supposed to be able to ultimately marry up with the NEMSIS data feed that Catherine just spoke about. For any of the hospitals that are in either action or get with the guidelines, the hospitals will actually be able to perform a file upload into this system. Those hospitals that are not in those two proprietary or for fee services, then there's going to be created through the RAC Data Collaborative a web-based portal that the hospitals will be able to enter their data. And they can do either a limited data set, which includes only the required data sets for dishes or the CBD council, or they can actually manually input the full data set. Right now, the web portal is full or fully developed for the STEMI data set, not as much for the stroke data set. They're still working on those. They're in beta testing for cardiac and alpha testing for stroke. The data dictionary for the cardiac data set is complete. The stroke data set is, their data dictionary is in progress. And there's an educational element as well for both the EMS systems and the hospital. And those educational materials have been created and are currently being uploaded to an online education platform that will be sent out to the various facilities. And that's the bullet points that I have.
So at the last meeting, you guys reported that 11 RACs had agreed to participate. Is that number increased, or do you know?
It's 14.
14 now. Preston?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to come up as a member of the public and add any additional information you care to share?
I apologize, I stepped in a little bit late, so I don't know exactly where all Dr. Walker covered, but the 14 RACs that have agreed to participate, they've signed the agreement to participate. We have collected sub-BAAs, I think, from all of them now. What? Oh, you can't hear me? Sorry, is that any better?
Yeah, that's better.
We've collected sub-BAAs from all of the RACs that have elected to participate. As Dr. Wamper mentioned, the actual website, web portal for data entry for the cardiac data set is in beta testing. All the data entry screens are complete. The logic in the background that runs it for to tell you it's a required field, etc. We're testing that. The data entry screens for the stroke fields are complete, but we got to still build out the logic there as well. Data dictionary for the cardiac data set is complete. The stroke set is under construction. I'm missing something. I apologize.
We won't know the difference.
Oh, the file upload capability. If it's a hospital that is already using another registry, or they're outsourcing their data abstraction to another entity, they can upload those files directly into the data collaborative as well, and that part of the registry is complete. The instructions for the file upload are finished, and we'll begin publishing that anytime. Well, actually, we've started that process within our RAC, kind of as a test, if you will. So the hospitals in our RAC that are using Action or Get With The Guidelines have been uploading files for a couple of months now that we're aggregating. So the file upload capability is finished, and that'll be included with the other educational materials for the direct web entry as well.
So could you share with us the racks that you remember?
If you will give me a couple of moments, I'll gather all that material up, and then I can come back in a minute if you want.
Catherine, you were going to add something?
Well, what I was going to add too is that the collaborative, just in case anybody didn't know, with Rider 67, there were funds that were distributed down from dishes to the racks in order for us to do the cardiac and stroke data reported back up to the state. And so this is an avenue for us, for the racks to be able to obtain that data and put that back, give that back to dishes. So this is our response to us being able to give the data back to dishes.
That's fantastic. Hmm? You have?
Look and see if we have the list.
Okay. I think what we've, so just to rewind a little bit of what we've found so far. Through the years, efforts from this committee and Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke Council of dishes have identified a number of gaps, but the STEMI receiving hospitals, the PCI centers basically, have performed in a very stellar fashion. And so the door to balloon times has uniformly dropped it into pretty much target ranges, but the mortality hasn't changed. So it became obvious that the pre-hospital piece is going to be the sweet spot of where we can do some major improvement in STEMI care, and that's what this effort is about, to identify gaps and begin to affect change in the pre-hospital arena. Okay, Chris?
Dr. Smallman, the 14 racks or TSAs that have opted in, TSA B, TSA D, TSA E, F, H, I, J, K, L, O, P, Q, U, and V.
Okay, can you translate that?
BRAC, Big Country Rack, North Central Texas Rack, Northeast Texas Rack, Deep East Texas Rack, Border Rack, Rack J.
How about major metropolitan areas?
Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, El Paso. What am I forgetting?
Okay, so it looks like you guys have made a huge achievement there, getting all those people to agree, and this is very, very promising. So I think we're on the way. So Todd, have you heard anything about this?
Yes, so our BRAC out in El Paso is one of the ones that is participating, and we've recently just, the board just approved funding so we can add the EMS component to our regional registry, so we'll be able to collect it regionally at the RAC and then submit what the state needs, but also to the RAC Data Collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
So our RAC is very excited about the opportunity to be able to really start looking at the full set of data for each patient, tying together both the pre-hospital and the hospital.
So, yeah, no, yeah.
So we do have 14 racks that are currently participating, and we all know that there's 22 racks in the state. So those other racks have chosen at this point to say that they really kind of want to see how the implementation is. A lot of them expressed a lot of great interest in it, but wanted to see what the data collaborative was going to be able to produce. We do have it to where the collaborative every year, we're going to open that back up to all of the racks that participate again. So it's not like once in, you're in, and once out, you're out. So every year, we'll be able to show them what we can produce out of this regional or this statewide registry. And then at that time, they'll also have the opportunity to come on board as well.
So, just to, the other issue is full participation in action versus not having the ability to participate for funding issues and others. David, can you talk about data set and data set light a little bit?
No.
No? Well, so the funding from dishes to the racks, for larger racks, there's perhaps a bit more funding. And for other racks, maybe Daryl, you want to come up and comment on this?
So I can comment a little bit on that.
Okay.
So for those, the hospitals that are already in action or get with the guidelines, there will be two mechanisms really, I suppose. Hypothetically, there will be two mechanisms. Either they can enter the data into one of the national data sets and then export them into to the state data set, or they can input them through the manual process into the state data set and then upload them into the national data set. If they only want to, for those hospitals that are not in the larger national data sets, there will be a limited where, I mean, they can almost literally enter the data on their smartphone as the patient's walking through the ED into the cath lab, and it's just it's a smaller data set that will be able to be much more palatable for the small, less resourced systems.
And were you asking about the funding part of your thing? So also with the funding, so when Dishes through the Rider 67 got the monies, what they did is they did they have a formula that they use to dispense other monies to the racks. And so they used that formula to give this CBD money to the racks as well. So as Dr. Smalling kind of alluded to, some of the larger racks received a larger portion of money. But when we came together as the Rack Data Collaborative, those larger racks put in a greater amount of money to be able to make this more affordable for our smaller racks. That's why it's a collaborative, is because the goal is to get 100% of the data, cardiac and stroke data, from all of our hospitals 100% of the time. And if we've got a rack that does not have that much financially that they're receiving for this, we want to make that more affordable. If our larger racks have more resources, then we should be able to share those. That's the collaborative. So yes, some of the larger racks put in a greater portion of money. They received a greater portion of money, so it was relative to what they received. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I just wanted everybody to know that it's not going to be about the haves and have-nots. It's going to be about the whole process. And the goal is to bring everybody in Texas up to the level where we can reduce the mortality from 10% or more to less than 3%.
It's all about the patient.
That's right. So this is anyway. So I'm just flabbergasted. This is awesome. I think this is one of the best things I've heard in a long time. But I'm hearing a lot of good things. So, Karen, you want to make any comments? Do you have any comments about this? You can take it up to the big committee and say, okay.
Well, I think we certainly can take it up to the big committee, but I just think it's wonderful that we are going to be able to see this data collected, and I know that individual services are going to want to see their information back. So certainly the aggregate data is important, but individually as well.
And we're excited about the opportunity to be able to look at it in the state of Texas and then base it on our rack, because our racks, to develop the system of care, that's one of the things we're charged with. So for us to be able to look at our regional system, and for all racks to be able to look at that and then look at it as a state, we'll be able to benchmark national, statewide, and rack-wide. So, and then the hospitals can use that as well. So.
Okay. So, any more discussion on that topic? Pretty well covered that. I'd asked Jamie McCarthy to talk about the STEM Accelerator project in SEDRAC, and he had to go to this other meeting. So, Catherine, round two for you.
Yes, round two. So for those of you that don't know, the STEM Accelerator 2 project Houston participated in the first phase of the project, and the project was related to reducing door-to-balloon times. The second phase of the project was we're looking at trying to include more rural facilities. What we're really trying to do is in the Duke STEMI Accelerator 1 project, we found that our transfer times for patients were really long. We've done a great job with door-to-balloon times. We've looked at first medical contact to balloon times, but we don't have a good handle on transfers. And that's not just in the Houston area. That was the 14 areas that the Duke STEMI Accelerator project kind of looked at, is we all struggle with transfers. And so one of the things with the Duke STEMI Accelerator 2 project is we want to encourage more of the rural facilities to partner up with their urban facilities, also including EMS in that as well. So we're looking at the inter-facility transfer part of it. And so the Duke STEMI Accelerator project, we've got 100% of our PCI centers in the Houston area that are now participating with the project, and they're tasked with going out to some urban centers and getting them involved as well. So we're in the first phase of the project. We've got all of the agreements signed, but we're working on the transfer part of it as well. So there'll be more data to come.
So tell us about the transfer agreement. What does that look like?
So that's a slippery wicket because not a lot of people want to sign transfer agreements anymore. But what we're trying to do is encourage those rural facilities and the urban facilities to somehow have a transfer agreement, whether it's written or we just have a process that's smoothly put into place. We all think that it's there, but the data clearly shows that it is not there. And so what we can do this time is we can go back with the actual numbers and say we're not doing this well and we need to do it better. And so transfer agreements, that's going to be up to the individual facilities. We're not saying they have to do it one way or the other, but we are saying that they have to somehow come together. Not have to, we're encouraging them to come together and make that better.
So I had the opportunity to have lunch with Dr. McCarthy the other day, and he related that some of our transfer hospitals basically called their interventional cardiologists locally, who won't be even seeing the patient or taking care of the patient, and asked for treatment orders. And the interventional cardiologist says just put them on the helicopter or her on the helicopter and give them an aspirin. And then the question is, should we give half-dose lytic? And they say, oh no, don't do that, it's too dangerous. Where the guidelines clearly state that if you can't get the patient in the lab within 60 minutes, get the balloon up within 60 minutes of first medical contact, then they need to get lytics. So I think one of the pieces of the transfer agreements with the hospitals are you have to stop that interim step. If you want to ship the patient, then you need to give lytics and ship at the same time if they're lytic eligible. And so I guess that's part of the accelerator project is to try to close that door. Is that correct?
And that's a good point because we did do the non-PCI toolkit several years ago, but we were focusing on that door to balloon. So now we're bringing that back into when we go out and talk with those urban facilities or the rural facilities. We're telling them that there's a toolkit that's already provided. It's not like they have to go and reinvent the wheel. It's something that's already there, that there's several facilities that have used it, and it covers lytic administration.
Yeah. So one could envision, so this is a tool that was generated by CEDRAC, and I would guess STRAC has something as well.
Yes, STRAC is currently deploying a new clinical practice guideline that says anything outside of essentially Bexar County or Comal County, where all of our PCI centers reside. If you're outside of those two counties, then all patients should receive lytics with immediate transport to a PCI.
So you can imagine that there's still a huge hesitance in the cardiology community about this because of the past trials that were poorly designed and executed that showed issues with that. And the subsequent data is not well understood, which is truly completely supported pre-hospital fibrinolysis followed by urgent PCI. So in order for this to get accepted ultimately will require a randomized trial. So we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Now, Dr. Wozniak says, I'll be here in 10 minutes. And so Lonnie, is he parking his car, or what do you? The traffic's bad. Poor babies, poor baby. Yeah. So Dr. Wozniak attended the Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke Council meeting on Saturday. Was anybody else at that meeting? You were? Okay, so go ahead. Tell us about the Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke Council meeting.
Okay. I wish I would have had I'd like to have my notes. So I'll give some overall points. Dr. Teddy Wu spoke about some of the research that's coming out of the Lone Star Stroke Consortium. He talked specifically about some mapping that he was doing with strokes.
So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Wu is a stroke neurologist at UT Houston and has been intimately involved with Dr. Garada's project, which identifies stroke patients in the field and takes a CT scanner. There's a CT scanner in the ambulance they go to. So if somebody has symptoms of stroke, that unit in Houston is dispatched to the home, business, or wherever, Walmart or wherever, and they scan the patient in the ambulance. And if they've got a negative scan for bleed, positive stroke, then there's a telemedicine loop where, I guess,
They do.
and they do a telemedicine interview with the patient, and then order the lytic in the ambulance, and they transport to the stroke center. Is that correct?
Correct.
So Teddy talked about that.
We did. He talked about several research projects, but that was one of them. The other thing is Dr. Wozniak talked about the RAC Data Collaborative. He talked about some of the data that's coming out. There's a tremendous amount of effort with the public health districts working for National Stroke Month to do, there's a lot of efforts around the state to reduce hypertension. I know that they're partnering with the American Heart Association to expand some of those efforts. I'm trying to think of what else. I don't have my notes in front of me. Those are the big ones.
So did they talk any more about the gap analysis, or do we have to wait for Wozniak?
So they gave some data, they showed some data, but I think that probably Dr. The data was looking at all of the hospitals that are participating through the Dishes Rider 67 initiative, and it looked at those hospitals that are participating through the data initiative that they're doing with the national registries, and then they also looked at the data that they're receiving through the RACs. So they kind of put those side by side and looked at how they're getting the data, gave us some numbers, which right now we're looking at 39% either way. So there's a lot of room for improvement on what we need to do for the stroke and STEMI data in the state. Randy, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about? Randy Cutzinger is nothing?
No.
So introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Randy Krutzinger with the SHS. I'm with the Rider 67 project. I just happen to have the update that the Rider gave to the council. Currently, 53% of all the eligible hospitals in the state are participating with our project. We set a benchmark that was taken in February, and that benchmark was at 17%. We picked February because that's when the 2 staff people came on board with the SHS. So we benchmarked at that point. Currently, 41% of hospitals located in rural counties are participating, compared to 59% of the hospitals in urban counties that are participating. We have developed some new hospital recruitment materials that highlight the different options that the hospitals have for participating. And we have some prioritized outreach that's expected to start the end of this month. We sorry, I've lost my notes here. The collaborative, we formed a collaborative group, and that group met for the first time April 26th, and that brought together a representative from the 7 different stakeholder groups associated with the Rider project, so that we can work in a more truly collaborative fashion with all the different stakeholders. A project manual for the Rider project was shared with the collaborative members, and that'll be posted to the Rider 67 webpage as soon as our websites come back up. And then planning for regional systems of care improvement activities are currently underway.
So basically, you're building the network, but you haven't collected the data or analyzed data yet, or?
We have collected data, and our OSER group is starting on the analysis.
So
at this
data's
point.
in, some data's in, but it's not analyzed yet.
I'm sorry?
Some data's in, but it's not analyzed yet.
Correct.
And could you just share with us, off the top of your head, what salient data points for at least the STEMI part of it are?
Clarification on what the data points are?
Yeah, I mean, the things that you're collecting from a STEMI perspective.
Well, ours is very limited compared to the National Registry data points, but confirmed STEMIs, and then we're looking at how they arrived. I apologize, I don't have the list of data points right in front of me, but there's the entire survey is 23 questions. You take out 5 questions for the RAC identification portion of it, and so the remaining questions are divided almost equally between stroke and STEMI. So we have about 8 to 10 data points.
So just only 8 data points. So this is a little less expansive than what is going on with the pre-hospital data collection effort, I guess. So will the pre-hospital data collection effort that's currently being generated by our RACs, are you going to be able to expand the effort at DSHS based on what you get from the pre-hospital data that should be coming in?
I would imagine that we could, but again, I would have to run that up to my leadership based on the verbiage of the actual rider and what is expected of us in our deliverables. I don't know if we can expand outside of that or not.
So if you exceed your expectations, do you get a bonus?
I hope so. I don't know for sure. You know, obviously, to truly improve systems of care, we'd like to see a little bit more extensive data set for analysis. However, the leadership group has come up with this latest version of the data set. It's newly revised, so our last data collection was the first time that we had that, and it's the one that we're currently using is even an expansion over what we originally started with the Rider 97 project.
Right.
So we have
Right.
expanded.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I was trying to find in my email if I could get the actual data points, but I think he covered most of it.
Okay. Preston?
Preston, you got it?
So currently, the data points include last name, middle name, first name, date of birth, ICD-10 principal diagnosis code.
Is this for the 67? This is
Well,
Rider 67.
This is what we are collecting to derive the CVD STEMI point data points.
Okay.
So realize that some of the data points that the Rider 67, those are summaries or they're calculated values, and so we have to collect. Let me give you an example. Would be time. So there's some of the data points are elapsed time, door balloon time, etc. So we have to collect the time that they arrived at the door, and we have to collect the time that they got the balloon. So it's 2 data points that we collect to answer the one question that the CVD Council is asking. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So actually, the data points that are it's not an exact match, but it's going to be pretty close. We've included the name stuff so that we can link the data to the EMS records at some point. So ICD-10 code, insurance, arrival date and time at the facility where they transferred to an outside facility, arrival method to the first facility, for transfer patients, arrival date at the first facility, arrival time at the first facility, also for transfers, the date and time they were transferred from the first facility. Was there a STEMI or a STEMI equivalent identified? Was the patient eligible for reperfusion? Was PCI performed? First device activation date, first device activation time. Was primary PCI for STEMI performed? Were thrombolytics administered? And for patients that received thrombolytics, the date and time of administration.
Awesome.
And just real quick, Randy, I know that you talked about it at Stroke, you kind of outlined this, you said the 7-member or stakeholder groups that are involved. Can you outline those member groups and then who the representative is? Because I think
I did not bring those notes with me, but I will go through that as best as I can recall. DSHS representative was Carly Bowden. From the RACs, we invited Dave Reimer. From Torch, Kwang No. From the council, we invited Marcy, and I can't remember Marcy's last name.
Is it Wilson?
I believe so. From GTAC, we invited Dr. Wozniak. From AHA, we invited Lonnie Den. And I can't remember who our THA representative was.
So those are the 7 groups.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, welcome, Robert.
Thank you.
So Dr. Wozniak is our official representative from the GTAC Cardiac Care Committee to the Cardiovascular Disease and Stroke Council, and he attended the meeting on Saturday. So we've heard bits and pieces of things from Catherine and others. You want to give us your spin on how things went? What's important?
Just important stuff. I mean, it was a very busy meeting, and with a variety of presentations, some of which are germane to us, our committee. Obviously, they continue to want to have a work towards a very close relationship in developing a unified front in tackling both stroke and cardiovascular emergencies, and that is borne out in the work towards the data collection. So one thing that we talked about is that we want to continue the close collaboration. We did talk a little bit about the data collection, and just this morning I got some of the elements from Dr. Rutledge sent me those that he wanted our committee to review some of those elements. And again, it comes in a very, and I will forward you the email so you can distribute it to the members to look at them, and with the hopes that we could look and see if any blatant abnormalities or omissions, but he would like to keep it as streamlined as possible for obvious reasons with collection of data. The elements, I looked at them briefly with the time that I had today to look at them, and there's, it looks like some of the basic demographics that we would all need, and the focus on the pre-hospital phase, trying to capture the specifics from when the call was made, when was the unit dispatched, type of the unit and its capabilities, BLS, ALS, and then scene time, transfer time, all those being captured in that pre-hospital phase. And then going into the next collection is focusing on symptoms, obviously, from the obvious of the duration of symptoms and how it's described, and culminating into the first responder or the transport unit's impression, what's their primary impression or diagnosis. and they spent some time on EKG, what the method of the EKG was interpreted, how they interpreted this as, and then whether or not they pre-activated the facility, and then even trying to get elements from what was the reason that you chose this facility versus something else with their, and they, fortunately, they have definitions that are alongside each of these elements here that you'll be able to look at. And then the final 3 lines of this long spreadsheet is really outcomes of what happened in the emergency department and what happened in the hospital. So it's heavy weighted towards what goes on prior to the patient crossing the hospital's threshold. And as you know, this movement, this initiative here is, it seems like there's a lot of, the focus used to be on the PCI Center was the repository of all the information centers around the world there. This is very much focused on what goes on before coming into the hospital. So I will send that to you for any input from the committee members. I know that Dr. Rutledge would like our input on these elements.
It sounds like they've expanded the scope of what they were going to do initially considerably. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. And so, Preston, you think this is going to mesh well with what you guys are doing? Is this sort of a combined effort? Well, isn't that wonderful? Okay. Well, so we have 44 minutes left. I think we could probably end a little early, but one of the things that I thought was important was to go over at each meeting where we are on our list of the goals for 2016. So the first goal was the pre-hospital data collection process should continue to be pursued, and it sounds like a huge amount of progress has been made on that front, and we've heard about that. We also discussed last time that the committee would explore mechanisms for administering lytics to STEMI patients identified by pre-hospital ECG and fibrinolytic eligible patients in urban care systems, hub and spoke systems, and aeromedical systems. So why is that important? There's a big feeling among caregivers that if you're in the city and somebody has a STEMI, you just load them and bring them to a PCI center. And you don't need to worry about giving lytics. And it turns out that in that environment, in the city, the average delay from onset of symptoms to balloon up is 4 hours. And we know that the threshold for doing something good to salvage myocardium is 2 hours. So we think it's going to be important to evaluate in a randomized large scale whether that's important, where we should be giving lytics as soon as we get our hands on the patients, one way or another. Then the hub and spoke systems, it seems like there really ought to be almost 100% administration of lytics. And then aeromedical, is it feasible to put drug on the helicopter so that when the helicopter responds directly to a rural setting where a paramedic unit or a basic unit has responded to a farm or a home well away from a close hospital, if the helicopter could have a lytic on board, confirm the ECG, if it hadn't been done pre-hospital, do it on the scene and get an order for a lytic, that would be useful. And that Christine Uhas told us last time about how they had actually done that in the greater Corpus area successfully and have good adherence. So let's just go around. So do you think, Todd, in greater El Paso, do you think you could convince paramedics to give lytics in the field prior to taking them to a PCI center?
So I think the medics in the field would be on board. I think it's going to, take a lot of effort to convince everybody administrators, medical directors. I mean, I think there's some work to do. We still have a difficult time even activating cath labs off of the pre-hospital 12 leads. So, I mean, we have a lot of work to do, but I don't think it's impossible.
Well, some questions were raised last time. One was, does the lytic have to be refrigerated? Well, it's a lyophilized product, and so the answer is no. So they don't have to be refrigerated. So you don't have to have a refrigerator or an ice chest or whatever on the unit. So that's one thing. Christine wondered if the helicopter vibration would precipitate out. And the answer to that is no, because it's a lyophilized product, and so there's no harm for vibration. So we found out those bits of information. So, Robert, what about in Austin? Did you sell that?
I think so. I think that just in general, lytics have really have quite a story, past. When first of all it was such, when you remember when you gave your first lytics, there must have been tons of cardiac people around the bedside to see, what would happen. And now we've gotten more comfortable with taking care of STEMI and realizing that we may be at the limits of optimizing our STEMI care with balloon. And is this another way to raise the bar? And I think we are becoming more familiar and more comfortable, even appropriately taking patients to the cath lab who have lytics on board, which in the past it used to be like, well, we're just going to, that's it. You do that card and you're going to do that, and we're not taking you to the lab because we're fearful of bleeding. And your studies have shown that that's not an issue. So I think with appropriate education, the time is upon us that we could get a more receptive audience to say it's the next phase in STEMI care, raising the bar. The other point I want to make is this. Fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot when we're either delayed significantly or maybe we just missed one. Someone the next day, you've seen this, I didn't think that was a STEMI, but the next day you're picking up the pieces where it was not only a STEMI, it was a big STEMI, and it really affects someone's life. And so in this case, maybe giving the lytic therapy, identifying this and improving someone's skill set, giving it pre-hospital, particularly when we have, or in the freestanding emergency departments, where we have so many stops now and different skill sets. If we're going to do this, we certainly will want to make sure that we're in tune with or in touch with the people that are giving it, and therefore we may raise the level of care those 3 degrees away, separations from the PCI centers. So, I know telemedicine's big in neurology and stuff, so this could cause us to be better in transporting the EKGs and to the right people at the right time. So this may cause us to raise our game in getting that information, and then hopefully there's people that have the harder time or delayed, they don't suffer unnecessarily. So the long answer is, I think it could sell in Austin.
David, what about San Antonio?
So I don't think in downtown San Antonio, where we have a mean 911 to PCI center time less than 30 minutes, I don't think we can really justify the additional cost of that. Once we get a little bit further out, where we have 911 to PCI centers or to a local facility, 45 minutes to 60 minutes, then I certainly see some value there. I mean, because it's my understanding that most of the lytics that are on the market now are fairly expensive, and currently.
So what if it was free?
So if it was free, I'm still not sure that I could make that sell in downtown San Antonio. We have 3 PCI centers within 3 blocks of each other, and the next closest one is an additional 4 minutes away. So I'm not sure that in downtown San Antonio it would be valuable.
So what about at 2 o'clock in the morning?
All of our interventional cardiologists live within 15 minutes of the hospital.
How long does it take from activation for the lab to be ready to go?
So that's variable. 2 o'clock in the morning, it takes a little bit longer than 2 in the afternoon. But that is one of the items that we are currently tracking is how long do our patients spend in the emergency department? And
In urban systems in the United States, it's 4 hours from symptom onset to going up, even in the cities. So I'm just saying that,
our data don't reflect that.
I understand, but I guess we need to test it though. Okay.
So if that
Yeah.
includes the pre-hospital, the pre-hospital time,
Yeah.
so the time
Yeah,
from
from
symptom
symptom
onset
onset.
to 911,
Yeah.
I mean, if we
Okay.
could deliver lytics then, at that time, that'd be great.
Okay. You comment?
Excuse me, my name is Alicia McDonald. I'm a paramedic here in Texas. I used to be a ground paramedic. I am a flight paramedic. I actually work for a system that gave lytics. I've personally given lytics as a paramedic. We had a very structured system called the receiving hospital. We had no financial output for our system, so that was something that they achieved through the local PCI center. And I personally watched my patients reperfuse in front of me, which is a profound moment for a paramedic. Because so many times our patients deteriorate no matter how hard you work, to try to bring them to be stable. So I would invite you to maybe invite that agency out. Their dynamics change within their county, and so they have 4 PCI centers now. They no longer, my understanding is they no longer use lytics because their dynamics have changed. But they may be able to share with you some best practices, things that they worked through in that process and how they were able to partner with the PCI center so that they didn't have, other than education, they didn't have an outlay on the front side. Some of that was transmitting EKGs. I just have to tell you it is. Paramedic initially diagnosed. They transmitted the EKG to the ER. ER physician confirmed with them, yes it is. They went through a checklist. Checklist, meets everything, and then called the report, and that's how they got permission to do it.
So where are you located?
So at the time, I worked for Montgomery County Hospital District.
Montgomery, okay.
They are still carrying.
They are still carrying it. Yeah, I know they still have some areas that are almost 60 minutes out. They're very frontier areas. They don't run a ton of calls out there, so I wasn't quite sure. I know the guys that are closer to the hospital, they're primarily going in and getting them straight to the cath lab. But they are a system that uses it very successfully and have been. I started there in 2000, and they were using it then. So that's a lot of data.
This town of Austin has become so unpredictable with traffic. It's unbelievable. I mean, just to get from one place to not one place. I mean, so, it may be becoming an easier sell because of the stuff, the realities that we face and the unpredictability. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the person with the big anterior waiting to get to the PCI center, even if it was 2 in the afternoon, waiting stuff.
Okay.
So I'm the one rural guy in the room, and we have, our closest transport time is 45 miles to a PCI center, where helicopters are often a half-hour response, so they're not often utilized. And one of my concerns, I think Dr. Wozniak shared, is that comfort level of convincing the medic and the medical director to let the medic give the lytics in the field. I get there are people doing it, but there are still people. I have 3 ER physicians that won't do it. They're uncomfortable with it, or they're uncomfortable with the information because the last information they got was the risk of bleed was higher than the benefit. So education, I think, is going to be huge. If you can find somebody to pay for the lytics, I can guarantee you chiefs like me are going to go, sure, we'll do it if it's free. But cost, if you can't get the drugs paid for by somebody else, cost is going to be really big because it is like $1,200 a dose, I believe. So
Yeah, I'm 100% sure we can get free drugs for at least a while.
at least a little. So yeah, I as a guy in a rural system, we've got to educate the medical director and make sure that the pre-hospital providers are comfortable and trained properly.
So it sounds like we need to have some people that have experienced it.
Right.
When we did it in Houston, the paramedics were so excited to be able to take somebody, big anterior, they arrest under their nose, shock them, get them back within, a minute. They wake up, still having chest pain, blood pressure 70. They give the drug, on the way to the hospital, pain's gone, blood pressure's 120. He says, taps the paramedic, I'm okay, what, take me home. So that's sort of the uniform experience. And then they wait in the lab to see the arteries open, and they give each other high fives because they actually saved the patient's life. So I think if we get a core group of people together that have that experience, we would be willing to talk to others that maybe other companies. Catherine, so you know what happens in our place, but what about the rest of the greater Houston area? What's your sense there?
So when I think about the region, I think about the 9-county region. We absolutely come into the same thing that David talked about, is we've got some areas that are, or what you talked about, 45, 60 minutes out from a PCI center. In the Texas Medical Center, you know, we've got 4 on the same block. And so it's not hard to find a PCI center, but sometimes it's difficult in those outer areas. So could there be an opportunity in some of the outlying areas? Absolutely. Same thing that everybody else has said, cost, education, physician involvement. I think that's the big driving factors. We need more physicians that are comfortable with lytics as a whole, for cardiac and for stroke. We just, as by and large, they're just not comfortable from what we're hearing from those outside facilities.
Yeah. So I get that. I think we have to have some evidence that would make people comfortable. So we're going to have to do a trial for that, I would think. All right.
Just one more.
Yeah.
In the outlying areas, I think we can save a lot of time if we can bypass our local ED, deliver the lytics in the ambulance to drive an additional 30 minutes to the PCI center. I think that's where the real juice that is worth squeezing is.
So, well, when we were thinking about that, if we pre-specify, if we do a trial and we pre-specify, we're going to look at three delivery systems. Urban, so you know, rigs in the close by, give it and then see or not give it and see what happens. Hub and spoke, still the same thing. There's still a pushback there. And aeromedical. I mean, can you guys and girls think about any other systems of care that we ought to include? Does this not cover something?
So there's one, which is my system. We skip the local hospital and go straight to the PCI center, even with the long trips. Even with us going 45 to 70 miles, our mean first medical contact to balloon is 83 minutes. So we're barely hitting the 90 minutes. I don't know what our symptom onset is because that is not being collected. But so that subset that's not stopping at the rural hospital, I think also would benefit.
Yeah, instead of aeromedical, then it would be aeromedical
It may just be
long transport.
right, rural systems with long transport, whether that's by ground or by air.
I think the state of Texas, with the delegated practice, it'll set up for a very nice natural experiment because there's going to be some EMS systems that are not going to participate. Well, correction, they may participate in the study, but they're not going to be giving lytics, and that would be sort of your control system because there's going to be some EMS systems that they're not. Their medical director is going to just say no.
I understand.
But I mean that sets up a really great,
Trial.
at least comparison.
But if we did a head-to-head randomized trial that was blinded, then we would generate the answer that was basically to be distributed around the country and the world.
So is that going to be completely blinded?
Completely blinded.
So once the patient arrives at the emergency department, the receiving folks would not know?
They would not know. So, now, I mean, unless you blind it, you won't know. We won't be able to say, okay, we don't know the answer. I don't think we really do, but some of us think we do. But that would convince all the naysayers if they're convinced of the safety. But we can discuss that offline. All right, So David has a person he would like to introduce for a presentation.
So we have Dr. McNally, who is the project leader for the cardiac arrest RES. Cardiac Arrest Registry to Enhance Survival, which is a national cardiac arrest registry that has most of the, or a large number of the large metropolitan areas who contribute all of their cardiac arrest information to. And there's a current conversation about having instead of a few of the Texas folks contributing, having a statewide mechanism. So,
Can I, before you get started, is this part of the Siren network or the other two? No. So if you could just tell us about that, that's great. Thank you for coming.
Appreciate the opportunity. And I have presented, so if everybody's at a form meeting, I'm same slide deck. I'll try to be a little more entertaining for the second time around, but I've worked with the project from the beginning. The focus is really about helping communities collect out-of-hospital cardiac arrest data at the local level to be able to benchmark it regionally or statewide and nationally. And it focuses quality improvements. It's really trying to match what historically has been unmatched. I mean, we were talking earlier about STEMI and stroke, and obviously the need for mechanisms to collect data. CARES is really focused on matching hospital data, EMS data with hospital data, so you can have a true measurement at the community level. These are the funding organizations that currently have contributed. The first 8 years of funding was federal funding from CDC and transition to private funding. And our mission statement really has been this simple: to try to help communities collect basic and standardized measures for out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, to allow for QA and benchmarking, and ultimately to hopefully improve care to increase survival. Our vision statement is to work with as many communities as possible. And the reason I've come out here, we've been working with several communities in Texas, and I'll show you a map in just a bit, but about 25% of the population of the state, when you add up the more than 12 agencies that participate to date, are participating from Texas. And we'd really like to try to work on getting the rest of the state on board as we expand the program nationally. We've really begun to recognize the opportunity for statewide improvement. We're currently working with 15 states with a coordinator, where we train that coordinator, and then they're able to help bring on board additional agencies and maintain further expansion. This is the growth, as you can see, over time. The current population footprint is about 90 million in the U.S., so it's just under 29%. It's over 1,100 EMS agencies, it's 1,500 hospitals. We touch communities, as you see in the next slide, in 22 states, and then the 15 statewide participants. This is current footprint. Where you see green is where we have a state coordinator. We just came on board with a coordinator in California in January. Other states we've been working with for several years. Where you see yellow, we don't have a coordinator in place, but we're working with at least 50% of the population. And then obviously red, as you can see, a lot of dots. I'll show you a more detailed map in just a minute in Texas. We've had a number of some of the original sites outside of Atlanta, which was the first site, come on board several years ago. These are the focus states. Obviously Texas, that's probably why I'm here, recognizing where we can try to change dots to a blue, or a green, where we can put in a coordinator to help manage more communities. As you can imagine, when you grow something and you have 6 staff, it becomes much more efficient to work at a state level where we can allow that state to see it as their own registry. And this is really the focus. Communities having access to their own data, both hospital and EMS agencies, where permissions are granted, can log in and see their own data 24/7. We have standardized reports. Hospitals have the same access to their own data. The idea of trying to allow for benchmarking. The data can be managed at the state level with a coordinator where permissions are granted. Regional reports can be generated very easily with the software, and state level as well. And I'm going to show you some state data in just a bit, and obviously feeding it, the identified, of course, into the national registry. Institute of Medicine had a report on cardiac arrest that came out in June. The committee sat for 2 years focusing on both in-hospital and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. These are the main recommendations in that report. And the first recommendation there is about establishing a national cardiac arrest registry. And we think CARES is well positioned to help more communities capture data, both at the local level and state level. A lot more verbiage here, but basically pointing back to potentially CDC providing hopefully resources in the future for infrastructure. But really we've transitioned over time when we went from federal funding to private funding, recognizing we had to change and develop a business plan, and that's where we've come up with a state model. So where a state can acknowledge, and it doesn't have to be a state office, but within a state, it can be a hospital association, it can be through RACs, it can be through really any mechanism that allows for funding of a coordinator position. Depending on the size of the state, it might be part-time versus full-time, and then a $15,000 flat fee that will allow that state to come on board. This is the current footprint in Texas, where you see red are communities that are participating and providing data. Blue is a number of sites that have expressed interest but are essentially not on board yet. We've had sort of a waiting list in a sense of trying to manage. This is where we think a state coordinator could help in terms of onboarding and understanding where the next community may be best suited to come on board. So this is actual data from Texas on the right, as you can see, and then looking at national data. This is report data that came out from 2015. Each year we send out a standardized report, usually by April. There's a little bit of lag time to complete and audit all the records, but it's an idea and a mechanism to show for benchmarking just over 4,600 cases in the communities in Texas that are participating, showing you location type here, obviously looking at witness status in terms of unwitnessed versus witnessed events, those compared with those witnessed by the actual 911 provider. Who's initiating CPR? We recognize that's a huge opportunity. I'm showing you obviously state level data. At the community level, particularly where it's a larger size community, we can provide de-identified data back to show sort of trees in the forest, and we can show that there's a lot of opportunity in certain communities for improvement, in community-based CPR, either through enhanced dispatcher training or in community-based training itself. We have certain communities that have almost higher than 60% bystander CPR rates, and certain communities that are closer to 20%. So the idea is there's opportunity. We look at the demographics of the event. This is the type of information that can be fed back to at the agency level. At a regional level, where you want to generate a report, there's permission, and obviously at a state level. In a tiered system, understanding, for example, how often is an AED being used in advance of an EMS provider getting there, and then when it is used, how often is it by the first responder versus bystander in terms of understanding a true public access defibrillation rate. Recognizing the most important metric in terms of predicting survival or return to spontaneous circulation. This is information, again, that we collect not just with EMS, but in a hospital report, they'd have access to that data too, to understand patients that come through their front door. The ROSC rate is often the best predictor of survival for that event. We also have the ability at a hospital level to see patients that get transferred versus those that come from EMS to the front door. We recognize that there's often a selection bias in patients that are getting transferred. So it allows the granularity when you have a large enough facility to understand what the survival rate would be, those that are brought directly by EMS versus those that are brought by hospital. Obviously field hypothermia, and then looking at overall survival admission, survival discharge, and then those patients that have a good neurological outcome. Thankfully, we have a very low missing to hospital outcome rate, less than 0.5%, and a lot of this is a result of minimal burden of the hospitals. That there's 5 questions. It's often one question the hospital needs to answer: did the patient survive in the ER? Yes or no. The EMS providers already check that box off. If they know that the patient's expired, there's no outcome we need from the hospital. So it keeps it very simple, and that's really what I think has allowed it to sustain. This is what we call lead scene survival, or a much more favorable situation where, on the left, a bystander witnessed event, and that patient's presenting in a shockable rhythm, close to 33% survival in this state, not terribly different from national. And then on the right, that same event, but then where there's bystander intervention. So a bystander witness event presents in a shock rhythm, but the bystander also provided either CPR or defibrillation. So the idea is I've had a chance to present at several committees over the last 2 days, and had an opportunity for discussion in a breakout session after the EMS medical directors meeting. And I think the idea is trying to move forward with how might it work here in terms of getting a coordinator in place. And I think there'll be continued discussion, but really wanted to have a chance to present and appreciate the opportunity.
Tell us, so you collected data. Are there any benefits? I mean, are you able to say, now that we're getting this data in, do you have best practices that are emerging, that sort of thing that you share with the participants?
Sure, great question. Yeah, our focus primarily over the first few years was just on measurement and the idea of step one in a community is to collect data. Step two is to begin to look at it, and then step three, we're acting upon it. We provide additional tools, so not just the measurement piece, but the improvement piece. So one example would be we have a module that can help a community do dedicated dispatcher CPR training, a video, work with the University of Arizona group that's developed a 1-hour self-instruction video for teaching dispatchers dispatcher CPR, and then a measurement tool to actually allow for data collection. I think maybe going one step further, I think I understand where your question is going, not just helping the communities do measurement, but also improvement. We have data to show when you look at aggregate trend analysis data over time that's been published in peer review that shows that there has been improvement in the collective communities that participate, both in overall survival rate, bystander CPR rate, as well as those patients where there's public access defibrillation at medical facilities. So it appears that there's been improvement. We looked at a 2010 data set and tracked that class over 5 years, and we've seen it. We've seen at the local level, usually the biggest issue is a community saying, we never could collect this before because we could never get the hospital outcomes. And now they have a mechanism where they can track an event, so if they make an intervention or change of practice, they can see a before and after effect. So we've developed, at the hospital level, hospitals that want to collect more data can do more measurement on targeted temperature management. The idea of providing additional tools than just the initial data set.
So I met recently with one of our emergency medicine physicians who's involved in pre-hospital trials with cardiac arrest. And so as she explained it to me, there have been a number of, there are two different activities that sort of have dwindled away, and now a new one that's emerging is the Siren network.
Yeah.
So how does this interact with Siren, or if so?
To be determined. I think Siren is, still an undefined process. I know there's been a number of agencies that have asked about could we use CARES as a mechanism.
Right.
I think the answer is yes. I think we need to see, this is not set up to obviously do randomized controlled trials.
Right.
This is focused on QA. I think for those that are familiar with the ROC, or Resuscitation Outcome Consortium, that really basically ended this in 2015, the value of being able to do randomized controlled trials is important, but the value, I think the most value that came out of that initiative, particularly the published data, is on observational data, actually getting communities to follow protocol. There was a doubling of survival in the ROC communities when they weren't doing the trials, actually just getting folks doing high-performance CPR and recognizing feedback, feeding back basic information is often where there's probably the biggest opportunity for improvement. So there'd be no reason that we couldn't do observational type, analysis.
Why don't we go around the table with questions? Jeff?
I was in the CARES presentation. I think it's, I think our hurdle is to figure out how do we coordinate and pay for it. Other than that, I think almost everybody's on board.
Captain Green.
Right, I had a question.
Sure.
There are centers, as you well know, that are considered standards of excellence centers that do a really good job.
Yeah.
I know you blended everything in national. If you were to give them, they set the bar and then compare their outcomes to Texas, what grade level would you give Texas right now And simply put, you know.
Oh, it's easy. I give Texas an A because a quarter of the state's participating, and I think that's the first step, you know, in terms of measurement. I think when people want to drill down and say, how are we doing? I think you have to look at each agency. Obviously, the discussion we had earlier was in a lot of states, too, that are big as Texas, there's rural, there's urban, there's suburban. It's really hard to make, it's really hard to say things when you have a community that's very small, that may have 3 events a year because you don't have sample size. But holding that aside for a second, communities just collecting data, they start looking and doing other things. And we believe that just data collection is an intervention because it really changes people to say, well, how are we doing in our dispatch process? And how are we doing in our community-based CPR training? And do we have public access to defibrillation? There's a lot of communities when they start collecting it, even particularly large cities, the first report when it comes out, they're like, we had no idea really where we were because we didn't have any outcomes. So I think that's the light bulb moment when a community has the ability to collect data. We don't focus so much on what is your grade, even though I gave the state an A collectively. It's more about now you now have a starting point, and the question is, you know, what do you do at the community level to improve upon that, you know, in terms of strengthening the chain of survival. So for participation, the state gets an A because there's been early adopters that began as some of the first cities outside of Atlanta. Houston and Austin, Travis County were one of the first sites that have continued, and then many others that have come on board more recently.
I know in San Antonio, I mean, we're in our 5th year of contributing. We have certainly used this mechanism to make changes within our system. I mean, one of the sort of the highlights of that is we were really surprised at how much of our neurologic survivors never were defibrillated. So they presented a non-shock rhythm, and yet they still walked out of the hospital alive. And so 10 years ago, those patients were all dead, all of them, either really or artificially still dead. So it's changed the way that we operate in the field.
Todd?
Yeah, I was in on the other meetings as well. Our neighbors to the north of us across the state line in New Mexico, in the southern part of the state, are contributing to CARES. And so in our RAC, we've already had some discussion with them. They've shared some of their data with us just to see what they're collecting and how it's benefited them. So I mean, I think it's a good thing. I think, like was mentioned, we just have to figure out how, as a state, because if you looked at his map, a good portion of the state is either contributing or interested. But then you look at the area where I live, and it's just blank. And that's some of the areas where I think we have some of the opportunities to create the biggest impact. The county just over from El Paso County has no hospital at all in the entire county, and has 2 small volunteer EMS services. So what chance do those patients have? But that's some of the data where I think if we had stuff coming out of there, then we would be able to show that there is definitely resource allocation needs that somehow we have to try to address. Just because people choose to live in those rural and frontier areas doesn't mean that they don't deserve the same level of care. But right now it's just how do you provide it? But I mean, there's, you know, once you leave I-35, there's not much happening as far as the CARES network goes in Texas.
I have one other request. Do you think you could send us, the committee, sort of a job description of what other coordinators do?
Absolutely. Yep, and we've developed that. Not a problem. I'd be happy to share it with you. Okay. Thank you very much.
So if you don't mind, Dr. Small, so how this comes up is, obviously, when I was in Fort Worth, we were still participating. They still are, but I'm no longer there. The larger cities that participate, now since the funding has changed, this whole subscription model that CARES has sustainable, we're looking at trying to form a state consortium. And so we had the meeting earlier. We have about 12 parties interested, and we're going to be setting up a website and try to get a listserv to see how many agencies, maybe some in the West and more, are interested, so that we can then kind of find a financial model of what it's going to cost each of the agencies and how we look at it. We know what the coordinator requires. We know kind of what each agency time commitment will require for entering data and working with facilities. The question is, how many people can we get, how many agencies can we get involved, and what will that potentially cost each of the agencies? So if you don't mind.
So where is the repository for the money?
What do you mean, there is no money right now?
I'm just saying, if there were money, where would it go?
Well, it would go to the coordinator. First of all, we have to find out how many are interested, and that's one of the questions. We don't know. We don't know, Dr. Swan. That's what we're trying to have the conversation.
No, I mean, you gotta have somebody to give the receipts to.
Bank account.
What's that?
I think he's talking about
The bank account. Well, the thought is to try to go through the racks, because their establishment, they have the new, I just went blank on the data, what was it?
The CBD depository.
The CBD depository. That's the thought process is similar to that. But once again, we're just trying to see the feasibility of doing this as a state. That's the reason Dr. McNally's here. And
Well, you already have evidence that there is interest.
well, but the problem is some of the agencies, the larger agencies, that under the current model that's changing, will probably not participate due to cost. So
And
even
so we've got 4 minutes. So the cost?
well, right now, like San Antonio, Houston. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a flat fee per state. It's $15,000, irregardless of population.
So what does the $15,000 do for you?
That covers part of our overhead, and then within the state, paying for a coordinator. That's really going to be up to deciding a budget on what that coordinator's salary might be.
So it's
150.
So we're talking 150K plus or minus.
That's essentially the number we were using earlier.
150 to 200K is what we think is kickoff money. You writing a check, Doc? I mean, you can write it to Strack. We'll take care of it right now.
So here's what, let me just tell you what works in Houston. So you get a champion who saved a couple of oil businessmen's life. And then you say, can you get your buddies together and everybody kicks in 20 or whatever, pocket change. And this is what you're going to get out of it. And that works.
And I think it's an excellent idea. I'll give you one example with the time. In California, that's actually how it's started right now. There's a dedicated coordinator that started in January. There's private funding that's covering the salary for this year and next. And then the idea is, instead of RAC, insert the word LEMSA. They're going to pay for it after 2018 and split it. But the idea is seed funding. I think that's been part of it. Can we get seed funding and get it started? Just to buy a little bit of time.
And that was actually part of the conversation that the group had right before y'all's committee was, we basically split apart saying, okay, we've got these different ideas for getting the seed funding, right? And if we could get 70 agencies, it's roughly $2,000 a piece. We think we could get 70 agencies be willing to spend $2,000. But we sent everybody away with some very specific things in their own region to go back and work on. We're going to get back together in August to kind of see where we're at. And in between now and then, start spreading the word with the listserv and things like that so we get people excited, on board with it, start getting other EMS agencies willing to say, yeah, I'm really interested. He's got 22 up there between who's in it and who's interested in it, and there's a lot of agencies missing. I mean, my agency's not on there. So there's several agencies that I know today that are very interested in it. I think Jeff's interested in it. He's not up there. I mean, there's a lot of those agencies. So we're going back to do some legwork, come back in August, figuring if we could get some wheels turning January 1, maybe a good kickoff date for us to shoot for. So, but some of that seed funding idea, I think, is very, we had a couple of ideas in that group.
We'll take those names of people that you say.
No.
No, those are
But
good
I'm just
people.
saying, I'm just saying that you need to find some champions that can go put the touch on people and say, this is what we need and this is what you get out of it.
It's happened in Dallas, correct? It's happened with y'all in Houston, so absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have 1 minute and 47 seconds left. Is there any other public comment? Daryl, of course.
I'll
We
take
have
30 seconds.
30 seconds, Daryl.
Dr. Smalley, I want to thank you and thank the CBD Council and DISHS for the money that came to RACS to make this data collaborative possible. That's what's really got this going. The sky's the limit now for us as to what we can accomplish. We are at risk in that RACs have been funded through the tobacco fund and trauma funding, and if that should go away, then our base funding goes away. So showing that we bring value to the state through this kind of effort helps RACs as we help you. And we're now at a point with DISHES where we're looking to identify the hospitals that aren't participating. That becomes kind of a legal thing that they're working on. But as soon as we can now pinpoint down to get to the granular level of who's not participating, I think what went from 17% to 52% of hospitals reporting can be 100% within a few months. Thank you, Dr. Sloan.
Thank you, Darrell. Any other comments, committee? Anything to add to our to-do list? Just added long transport.
Oh, I think it's important that because the DISH's website is down, the Cardiac Care Committee website is also down. And as soon as DISH's gets back up, we'll probably have to relook at some of those links. So
Okay.
all that information is not there.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming and braving the weather, et cetera, and it's a wonderful meeting. On time.